So my name is Mary Pat, and I'm a lecturer in speech and language therapy at NUI Galway. And my kind of particular interests are speech and language therapy for multilingual families. And the main issue I would say really is a kind of a lack of awareness about the fact that most people in the world speak two or more languages, that it doesn't cause delays of any kind, not even a temporary delay, and also that people who struggle to learn language in general can and do become bilingual. There's no kind of agreed definition of what it means to be bilingual or multilingual. The one I like most really is from Catherine Conhart, and she bases it on need. So the family needs to use two or more languages to participate in all aspects of their lives. But of course, because it doesn't cause any delays or disorders, it's fine to choose to add another language in as well. And actually, Catherine Conhart says that for, let's say, a monolingual child who struggles with language, let's say who has a language impairment or developmental language disorder, that an intervention could be for them to learn a second language, because what they need is the mechanics. Part of what they need is the mechanics of the grammar, let's say, to be made explicit, and the rules to be made explicit and taught the rules, and then look at it in a second language and talk about, oh, that's how you say that in Irish, let's say, versus how you say it in English. And build that metalinguistic awareness and harness the power of cross-linguistic influence. So in terms of like the training, teachers would benefit from, in order to support multilingual children who've got speech and language difficulties. um, I think there are things like, for example, realizing that there are there's a lot of individual variation when it comes to multilingual language development. So we need to know the backstory. For example, is this a child who has been acquiring both of their languages, or if it's more, all of their languages from the get-go? So they were kind of different. There's no, again, agreed upon definition. So they talk about bilingual first language acquisition, which is where children would be acquiring all of their languages from the get-go. Then there's early second language acquisition, where they might be monolingual at home until they enter into childcare or creche, or preschool, and then add in a second one. And then there's second language acquisition, where they're monolingual until they go to school, would say, and they start the second or third language then. For the children who are acquiring two or more languages from the get-go, they go through the same ages and stages as monolingual children. Now, I'm not a fan of comparing monolingual and multilingual children, um, because while yes, they're all on the path to language acquisition, they are doing different things. So for the bilingual first language acquisition child and the child who's like early second language acquisition, they go through the same like ages and stages in terms of babbling, the emergence of first words, putting two words together, and things gradually getting longer and more complex. They're not slower to talk or later to talk than children who are acquiring one language only. Um, the other thing about that is that, like, there's a lot of individual variation in early language development, which makes it kind of difficult to work out, is this a child who's late to talk, or is this in the range of typical development? So we need to know the backstory. How much exposure have they had to all of their languages? What do they need the languages for? Who do they use them with? And to kind of be aware that there is this individual variation, because we use language with different people for different purposes and in different places. So you might speak one language at home for your family, or on Skype or Zoom via extended family, and then you have a different language in school, and you may have a different language for, let's say, religion or extracurricular activities. So to bear in mind that the the background in terms of the languages and the opportunities to use them. There's some nice analogies, I think, that are useful about when we think about language development in multilingual children. One is that it's like a garden. So you can prepare the soil, plant the seeds, water, do the weeding, but you've no control over the weather. So, like, there may be a frost which may kill off some of your plants, or it may rain very heavily, and that may do damage as well. So the idea is really that, I suppose, we have a control over our input to the multilingual children. Another analogy that I like is the one of baking a cake. So if you're talking about like a raspberry and white chocolate cake, if you put in more raspberries, you get a more raspberry flavored cake. So input is really important. I think for teachers as well, it's really important to harness the power of like all of the child's languages and do cross-linguistic comparisons and talk about, oh, this is how you say it in Spanish or Irish, and this is how it works in English. Look where the verb comes, for example. And because with multilingual children who need speech and language therapy, we need to support all of their languages, and not just their current use of language, but we need to consider their future use of language as well. If, for example, we ignore one language, then it's like, in a way, or tell a parent to drop a language, it's like saying, well, stop using one of your hands. And then you very quickly realize what you use that hand for, and all the things you use it for. So we never advise people to drop a language, because what you're doing then is you're really, Catherine Conner says this, that you're then turning what may be like a language impairment into a handicap, because you're cutting the person off from all of the language skill that they have in the other languages. Because for multilingual children, and this is important for teachers to remember as well, is that the language abilities or skills are distributed across the languages and over time, and the things may change over time. So the solutions, I would say, lots of visual supports. So visual schedules using like, yeah, photographs, pictures as much as possible. Wordless picture books are a great way into narrative. Translation activities where you could use Google Translate and like explore how bad it is in terms of how it doesn't translate correctly, and have discussions around the differences and similarities between the languages. So I think that's kind of all I have to say. Like, really, I went on longer than I anticipated. But the key thing is that if people need to be multilingual, they need to be multilingual, and it's the speech and language therapist's job is to support them to be multilingual, because that is what that family needs. Yes, we're kind of hampered by a lack of resources for like assessment, for instance, but there's a great opportunity for real close collaboration with the family in terms of finding out about what's important to them, what goals do they want to set for their child, for what languages, and also having like working together with the parents to learn more about the other languages if you're not familiar with them, and also with you know cultural issues that are important. So things like maybe, for example, eye contact, and cultural differences around styles of interaction. Okay, I think that's it. Hopefully that will do, Pilar. And actually, one, I'm just looking here at your points, and I'd say another thing is to be curious about other languages and other cultures, and being open to like finding out more, and viewing the family and the child as experts in their culture and their language, and really work genuinely collaboratively. I just thought of another thing, and that is that it's also important to think about speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and how for multilingual children, their abilities in those four areas, so comprehension, expression, reading, and writing, will vary across the languages as well. So we need to think about like what exactly are we looking at when we're looking at an aspect of language. And the other thing was to do with, oh yeah, multilingual or bilingual doesn't have to mean fluent. So for example, let's say I can have conversation in Irish, I can do simple emails in Irish. I never read for pleasure in Irish because I'm too slow. I couldn't do anything formal or academic in Irish. I don't have the vocabulary. Um, but I can understand more than I use, for example, and I have limited opportunities to practice what I have. So that also is something to consider. Bilingual children who are acquiring both of their languages from before birth, let's say, they pass through the stages of babbling, first words, putting two words together, three words together, and so on and so forth, at the same ages as the monolingual children. So let's say, understanding of words can begin from as early as 8 months or so. First words appearing between 9 and 12 or 15 months. It depends on where you read. So for monolingual children and bilingual children who are acquiring both of their languages from before birth, those ages and stages are the same. There's a lot of individual variation, so we don't want to get too attached to the time frame or to be too rigid about the time frame. The main thing is that we see a child's language development happening and that we see them making progress, like being interested in communicating, learning new words, using gestures, for example. For the child then who has one, let's say, home language very well developed first, and then they go to school and they add in another language, um, then the pattern is different in that they talk in the literature about four stages of second language acquisition. So there's kind of, I don't want to go into too much detail about that, but they don't obviously babble because they've been through that phase. So what they're doing is they are now adding, it's like their first language is the house, and the second language then is like the ivy growing on the house. So they use the skills from the first language to acquire the second one. Here's another addition about the stages of second language development in children, where let's say they are acquiring a second language when they start school. Some of the literature talks about four stages that happen. So the first stage is where they use their home language in school, even though there's maybe no one or very few other people around them using it. Then there's this mention of a period called the silent period, and it's interesting because there is recent evidence to say there isn't enough high quality research to support the existence of a silent period. That would be where the child doesn't speak at school, that they spend, the idea is that they're spending their time kind of building up their comprehension, observing what's going on. It can last a few weeks to a few months. And in general, what they say is that younger children stay longer in this stage than older ones. They are interacting with people. They're just, well, what they would say is silent. And then the dilemma, kind of in terms of speech and language therapy, if a child like this is referred, is the question is this the silent period of second language acquisition, or is it selective mutism? Now, selective mutism is an anxiety disorder, and these children would be seen in the context of a team. And essentially, the evidence suggests that there is not enough high quality evidence to say that the silent period is a real phenomenon. But it would be very interesting to hear, teachers' experiences of the silent period, and more research needs to be done about it. So then the third stage of the second language acquisition when children start school is when they start to begin to produce some of the second language. And often that looks like a kind of formulaic chunks and phrases that they've learned off, like things like I don't know, or um, thank you, or excuse me, or what's happening. So they're learned as chunks. And then the final stage is where the child begins to create novel sentences and utterances themselves. And the thing is that when the second language is added in, like this, so let's say Polish is the language of home, then the child goes to school in English. The English development won't will be influenced by the fact that Polish is the first language, for instance. So what can happen is that in English, the child will be using language in a way that may look like there's a problem, but actually it's just an artifact of the languages influencing each other, and that the pattern of English development is slightly different when it happens later. And the job of the speech and language therapist then is to work out, does this child have a language problem for definite, or is what I'm seeing a result of the fact that they haven't had enough exposure to English? They've only been exposed to it, let's say, for a year, and they're now 6. Then we wouldn't expect them to be, to be fluent in English, because language development is complex and it takes a long time. And when we think about that child who is acquiring the second language later, so like in school, we need to think about the language of for social communication and basic interaction skills, which can happen quite quickly. And then there is the language for academic work, which takes longer to acquire. And what can happen is that the child can be very adept with the basic interactional kind of social language. And so that gives a kind of a false impression, because they can be quite adept communicatively. Um, and you realize then, oh, hang on, but they are very good at that, but they don't have the academic vocabulary or concepts yet.